Well, thanks for coming this morning. We'll get in and talk about the topic at hand, but I can't help but maybe bring what's been top of mind for me for a week. I don't want to dwell on this morning, but we have a serious problem in our nation that's been, I think, exposed by the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And we've got to keep thoughtful dialogue going in this nation. Words are not violence. Violence is violence. I was chatting with Eric Schmidt yesterday, a senator from Missouri. Of course, he was an attorney general, and I love Darin's background as a prosecutor and working in that side. I think they bring a lot of what they call appropriate clarity to the job here in Washington that can sometimes be lost in the fog of war. But Eric Schmidt shared this with me yesterday that it's ominous to me in terms of what's happening with the attitudes. Look at the polling here. He said 47% of Democrats say the rise of fascism is their top political concern. Rutgers poll, just recent, said 55% of Americans on the left believe assassinating Trump would be at least somewhat justified. This is ominous, truly, and something that has got to be addressed. It is not time to back away, it's time to continue to engage on this. But if you knew Charlie very, very well. Knew Charlie when he was 18. He used to come out to Montana a lot. Some of his early supporters, one was Foster Freeze in Wyoming, the other was Greg Gianforte, my business partner in software now, was a former houseman of the governor of Montana. And when Greg and Susan Gianforte would have Charlie Kirk at the house, back when he was literally a kid, and were personally helping support his beginnings there financially. So it's a troubling time, and when you see the latest reports here of the suspect assassin was asked by his parents, "Why did you do this?" And his response was, "Because of his hateful speech." This was not a moment of rage by this suspect, as we can tell. This was very premeditated, and it was a thoughtful assassination by this young man. So anyway, not to start on a down this morning, but this is a very important moment in our nation's history that we've got to rise above this and continue to work on label, in terms of the labels that are called people constantly a fascist. Good grief, that's a strong term, and it can lead to violent outcomes. So anyway, with that thought, I want to switch back to something of a happier topic around what we do in this nation as it relates to getting more people to work. When I chat with employers around our country, one of the number one concerns has been, I can't find enough people to fill the jobs. And yet we have a federal government that sadly has created what once were well-intended programs initially that then explode, get abused, and turn into incentives to not go to work, instead to continue to live with dependencies on the federal government. I think about how noble work is. When you go to an event, when Cindy and I will come home from an event, we'll be chatting in the pickup, and I'll say, "Who'd you talk to tonight?" And she'll say, I can't remember her name, but she is and she'll give the job description. And I'll say, "Yeah, golly, I talked to this guy, I can't remember his name either, but he works at so-and-so." And the point is, our work is our identity. The first thing you ask somebody is you come up to somebody and say, "Hi, I'm Steve Daines." And say, "Hi, I'm Susan Smith." And the next question you ask is what? What do you do? It's your work. Our work is our identity. And it's a noble mission for us in terms of just our society to continue to get people back to work, to have a job, to wake up in the morning and do something that has meaning and purpose, and also supplies the needs of our families. And so the work that Congressman LaHood and I are doing here on the reforms on TANF is a classic Washington, D.C. example where something started as noble, trying to help truly needy people. You think about the parallel here perhaps on Medicaid, where it was a truly noble mission when it started, and then the thing exploded in expense. Medicaid now is nearly one of our number one line item expenses on the federal budget. It's popping nearly $900 billion a year between the state and the federal components. When it started off just 30 years ago, that's not when it started, but if you look at the metric 30 years ago, it was about a $300 billion entitlement. Now it's pushing $1 trillion. Not sustainable. What we try to do in the One Big Beautiful Bill were some very modest Medicaid reforms that said, you know, if you're able-bodied without dependents, do you think maybe you could work 20 hours a week to receive Medicaid benefits? That's what we did as Republicans. You think about the welfare reform back in the 90s that were successful. We've got to continue to do this. We made an important first step with One Big Beautiful Bill. And by the way, probably one of the most important outcomes of the One Big Beautiful Bill on the tax side was permanence. I told a couple of guys last night at a reception I was at, I said, we're going to name our next grandchild Permanence. That was kind of a one-string guitar on that. We had battled, and God bless our house friends over here. They put down a 5-year mark on that, and then a cliff, and we had to work that out to make the CapEx, R&D, and interest expense permanent. That is jet fuel for the economy, and it'll be our key for innovation to compete against China is by permanent expensing of R&D over the long haul, and removing that uncertainty from the C-suite of what's DC going to do when every time you have expiry tax provisions. So the TANF provisions, I'm going to get, I'll toss it over to Congressman LaHood. Very important in terms of tightening up the work requirements and making sure that the people who truly need it are receiving this assistance, those who are 200% or below of the federal poverty level. So again, Republicans get accused sometimes of not having a heart, but we have a heart and a brain. I think that's the difference. And we realize we're in an unsustainable path from a fiscal viewpoint, and it's not only the fiscal concern we have, I think there's a societal concern of trying to get people back to work. So, Congressman LaHood, I'll toss it to you, and you're a great partner, a happy warrior. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Senator Daines, and let me just thank Jim and Ripon and everybody here for what you do at the Ripon Society, for the opportunity to visit with you this morning. Always a pleasure to be with you, and I'm grateful for the work that Ripon does on advocacy and putting on programs like this, and the opportunity to be here with Senator Daines to talk on this important topic this morning. I guess just before we get into our Jobs for Success Act that Senator Daines and I are the sponsors of, him on the Senate Finance Committee and obviously me on the Ways and Means Committee, I'm just, we tend to forget, we have short memories, but you go back to the election last November and being able to go through reconciliation because we have the Senate, the House, and the White House. I don't think anybody thought that was going to happen, but we would not have the Senate if it wasn't for Senator Daines' work at the NRSC. That seems like eons ago, but his hard work in winning those seats, to have 53 senators, it wouldn't have happened without his hard work over years and years to get that done. And so being in the position to be able to go through reconciliation, which many of these reforms we did through the One Big Beautiful Bill came about because of that. And fast forward to January of this year, I give Jason Smith a lot of credit. We worked very hard to try to get the bill where we wanted it in the One Big Beautiful Bill. And we predicated a lot of the bill on how do we appropriately reform Medicaid in the bill. And there's been a lot of misinformation, I think, on Medicaid, on what we did in Medicaid and what we didn't do in Medicaid. But it leads into what we're doing on the Jobs for Success Act. Medicaid, we move about 4.8 million Americans off of Medicaid into work requirements and into a job. Now these are able-bodied adults. And what we focused on is these are individuals in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s that have the ability to work that are currently on Medicaid and not working. Now we have 7.2 million unfilled jobs in this country right now. And to Steve's point, everywhere that I go back home, can't find enough workers. And can't fill these jobs. And so transitioning people off of Medicaid, which we did in the One Big Beautiful Bill, I guess what we're supposed to call it now is Working Families Tax Cut Act. That's the official name that Tony Fabrizio, the pollster at the White House, told us to call it now. So that's what we're doing now. But
thank you for that.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is, we had to do something about these programs that have gotten way out of control. So moving people into jobs is what we did. So if what we didn't do is the core functions of Medicaid, if you have a child that's developmentally disabled, they stay on Medicaid. If you have an adult that's developmentally disabled or has disabilities, they remain on Medicaid. If you're a senior citizen on Medicaid, you keep your Medicaid. If you're a young mother that's on Medicaid, you keep your Medicaid. That's the reality of it. Now, we did kick off 1.6 million illegal immigrants that were on Medicaid. Again, I don't think anybody thinks that was the wrong approach on that. So that's the reality of what we've done in Medicaid moving forward. And so as we think about how do we fill these 7.2 million unfilled jobs, that's really where our Jobs for Success Act comes into play. And so we introduced that with the thought of TANF has to be reformed. It is less accountable today, it is less effective, it is not efficient like it was. It has not been reauthorized since 2005. Now go back, TANF, which of course is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, was established in 1996 under the welfare reform work that went on when Bill Clinton was president, Newt Gingrich was speaker, bipartisanship created this program. And it worked fairly well in transitioning people off welfare. It was the biggest migration of people off welfare, but it needs to be reformed again. In 2023, Congressman Jason Smith, Chairman of Ways and Means, we asked for GAO to do a study of TANF, which really hadn't been done. That study came back and said 78% of TANF goes to non-assistance programs. It's not even going to the programs it needs to go to. And so what we've done in this bill is, again, feeding off what we've already done in the One Big Beautiful Bill, is how do we transition people to work? How do we make sure these dollars that are block granted to the states go to work assistance programs? How do we transition people into the jobs they need? And making sure it goes to people that really need it, 200% below the poverty line, the real core need that people have out there. And so we put together this bill. It's got support in the Senate, support in the House. On the Work and Welfare Subcommittee, obviously, we're trying to get some Democrat support on that. I've worked closely with Danny Davis, my counterpart, on a lot of other bipartisan bills. There are many portions of that they like. Obviously, we'd love to get some bipartisan support on that, but we're working towards that goal moving forward. But we have broad support on the committee right now, and in the broader conference we do also. And so we look forward to pushing this forward and trying to get it across the finish line sometime in this Congress is what we're hoping to do.
You guys talked a lot about what was in the Working Family Tax Act. Okay, got it. How do you think the reception has been across the country as you guys are going back home and others are going back home? I think yesterday we heard Chairman Crapo talk to several of the CEOs at BRT, and his ask was, I need you to talk about it and talk about what it's going to do for jobs. And all of that. And I'm just curious sort of how that is, how you guys are seeing that reception when you're back home. And then second question, is there another reconciliation on the horizon?
I'll have Steve answer that. On the first part, I was obviously home in August for about 3 weeks, traveling around. I mean, President Trump got elected on two issues, in my view: fixing the broken immigration system, the unmitigated disaster at our southern border, and fixing the economy. Obviously, the One Big Beautiful Bill is predicated on fixing the economy. When I go home, are people feeling that every day in Peoria, Illinois? Not yet. I mean, we've set the predicate for what we need to do, right? And I think all those policies, making permanence 199A, making permanent bonus depreciation, research and development tax credit, all those things that are in the bill are going to work. My own sense is there's been a lot of money and resources sitting on the sidelines waiting to be invested as long as we have predictability and certainty in the economy, and I think we've created that. But it hasn't hit everyday Americans yet. So I think the real test will be, we have to implement it. We have to get control on tariffs. But a year from right now, as we head into the election, if inflation is down, if interest rates are down, if energy costs are down, if people feel like they're bringing home more money, similar to what we had in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act under the first Trump administration, which was really rocket fuel for the economy, everybody felt that. I mean, that's what our ultimate goal is. We're not feeling that right now, but I think there's optimism and people have hope but it's gonna take a while to get that implemented. And I think we gotta continue to work with Treasury on guidance to get it implemented. And then secondly, I do think we have to work on tariffs, because I think tariffs are holding us back in a lot of different ways, and we can talk more about that.
So I see that bill as a means and not an end. And I completely agree with Darin that when we turn the corner on October of 26, politically speaking, it'll come down to the economy, inflation, the price of gas. I mean, a lot of everything else here in DC will be background noise. And I think one of the challenges we face, I think, in terms of messaging and politically on this bill is, the headline on here was we prevented a $4.5 trillion tax increase. Well, nobody felt the pain of that tax increase. So if the taxes would have gone up in 26 and then suddenly the cavalry rides in and lowers them where you feel the pain of the tax increase and now you feel the relief of the tax decrease, that's a cause and effect politically speaking. What we did here was preempted, which is rare in Washington DC to actually preempt something, which is what exactly we did. When I was up at an event in Montana right after we passed the bill here, early that morning here in Washington DC on a 50-50 vote, with J.D. Vance breaking the tie on the Senate side. And by the way, God bless the House, Darin. Speaker Johnson, I call him Magic Johnson. I mean, really, it's like you're down 20, if it's a football analogy, you're down 20 points with 2 minutes left, and somehow he puts it in the end zone. I mean, remarkable, and appreciate what you guys are doing. As they say, the House has got a lot of strange cats, and Richard has some exotic cats to boot, you know, so it's, and having been a former House member myself, I empathize with the challenges sometimes with such narrow margins. But that's gonna be one of the challenges. But when Tim introduced me at a fundraiser, and so I spoke, I threw it back at Tim. I said, Tim Sheehy's new name, the new senator from Montana, is the $4 trillion man. Because had we not picked up Tim Sheehy, Dave McCormick, Bernie Moreno, Jim Justice, well, every one of those votes was the deciding vote on that bill. We had to go 3 deep on the depth chart to get to 50-50. And so this kind of illustrates how narrow the margins are here in Washington and how thin the line is between victory and defeat in very, very substantive outcomes, like a $4.5 trillion tax increase. The one big beautiful bill, I'm sorry, I'm not politically correct like Tony Fabrizio wants me to get on the new message. I mean, it's OPB me, it is, whatever. But there is so much in that bill that we've really not unpacked for the American people to connect to the benefits. And one of the problems, I used to sell software, when you are coaching a young software salesperson or a sales engineer, they like to get technical and talk about all the features of the software. When you go to the C-suite and sell, you don't talk features, you sell benefits. And I think that's one of the problems. We as Republicans want to sell features. It's benefits that the American people care most about, truly the pocketbook. I was at an event in Roundup, Montana. We saved a coal mine with that bill. We literally saved it. Saved 250 jobs. It is cause and effect. The Biden administration was slow rolling some approvals. We were running out of some federal land there for coal mining. They were going to lay off everybody. I show up in August, we had Trump's signature on the one big beautiful bill, a bunch of big burly coal miners, literally with, you know, coal on their faces, hard hats, headlamps, big guys sitting there, you know, I mean, just staring at me. And I talked about what we did. The response, you'll never see one of these guys cry. I was nearly crying as they stood up and cheered. We saved their jobs, and it's absolutely costly. But we've got to get out and connect the dots to do better, which we're not doing enough because of their job.